Hey, my name is Sam. I'm with Driveface Consulting. We've saved our clients over $1 million in app development costs because we build exclusively using no-code platforms. And today, I wanted to talk about a concept called vendor lock-in. I hear a lot from potential clients that are concerned. They've either read it on online forums, on Reddit, what have you, and they're concerned about going down the no-code route. And so wanted to share my thoughts on vendor lock-in, how to address it, and kind of what to be aware of. So first of all, what is vendor lock-in? So vendor lock-in is basically using a platform and having having there be obstacles to switching to another platform. Whether it be cost or one that we hear it often a lot is Bubble. So Bubble, one of the advantages of Bubble is that it's both a front end and back end database tool. And so you can kind of build the entire app in one place. So it's considered full stack. So that's both a plus and a minus, because if you ever wanted to move off of Bubble, one of the biggest criticisms is Bubble doesn't make their source code available. So why is vendor lock-in a concern? So the concern is if they ever went out of business, or if they have price changes or pricing model changes or whatever changes that are unpredictable, people don't want to be locked in. They want to have the flexibility to move to a new platform. So things like being able to export code, which Bubble does not allow you to do, become important. Now, just a quick note on that. If you go to the website, Bubble founders have said that if for whatever reason, if they do ever go out of business, they'll make Bubble open source, just so you still would have access to your application if something were to happen to Bubble. But given their pricing changes, there has been still a concern, and because they can't export code. Just a quick note on that. Two platforms that do come to mind that can export code that are no code are WeWeb and Flutterflow. So WeWeb exports code to Vue.js, and Flutterflow exports to Flutter. Now, what I've heard from coders, I'm not a coder myself, but the code that is exported is kind of a little bit unusable and uneditable. But at the very least, in the case of WeWeb, for instance, you could export that code and self-host it, so you're not having to use the WeWeb platform to deploy and maintain your app. So what do I think about that? So number one is, I think people forget that basically any solution that you build will have some level of vendor lock-in. So for instance, a lot of platforms or a lot of apps are using some sort of API. In some sense, you're kind of, switching APIs can be a challenge. Another thing in talking to coders, exporting the code, or even if you built it in a coded to begin with, going and as a coder, going and editing someone else's code is not necessarily the easiest thing. And so a lot of times some coders will be like, it's almost easier for me to start over, right? I've heard that from lawyers as well. Like, they'll take documents from another lawyer and they'll say, it's honestly easier for me to rewrite the documents than it is for me to try and figure out, what they were trying to do and edit it and trying to, figure out if there's certain things that need to be changed, right? So you're going to be locked in some way. Hosting is another one. If anyone that's used a WordPress site or WooCommerce site, like changing hosting can be a pain, right? So even though WordPress is open source, like, there's still switching costs, right? So I want to make that important, something that people realize. Second of all is, if we're talking about a startup and they're building what's called a minimal viable product, or MVP, right? If you're building a MVP, your number one mission at this point is to validate that you're solving a problem painful enough that people are willing to pay for a solution, right? And your mission is to do that as quickly and as cheaply as possible. So whatever solution allows you to do that as quickly and as cheaply as possible is the best solution. Vendor lock-in really shouldn't be a concern at that point. Another thing that we hear is, well, saying, what happens if we get 1,000 users, 1,000,000 users, what's going to happen? And I always tell people that's a great problem to have. But the reality is you've got 0 users right now, right? So you want to just build something for where you are today. Again, certainly be concerned about some of these other things and have an eye out for it. But the reality is most startups never get any real traction. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about it, right? Just have a plan, a contingency plan if something does happen. Now, the last thing I'll mention is if you are truly worried about it, and again, I'm not saying it's not a concern, it certainly should be a concern. What we typically recommend is separating out the front end and the back end, whether that be Bubbles the front end, WeWeb as the back end. We usually recommend Xano, which is the no code tool that we typically use as a back end. So with that, Xano's designed to be scalable. There's a lot of startups that have been on Xano for a long period of time with the Bubble back up front end that have scaled for 3-4 years now. And so what that allows you to do is if you ever outgrew Bubble or whatever other front end that you had, then you'd have the flexibility of moving to a new front end. And so whether you want to do coded or just use a totally different front end, and then you're not having to worry about migrating your data, shutting down your app for a period of time while you kind of exported your tables out, things like that. Now, I mean, certainly then you are using Xano, which obviously there's lock in there. So, there are the ones like Superbase, things like that. So that's usually what we recommend, and that gives you a lot of flexibility. So you've kind of spread your risk out a little bit as well. But, I think certainly you should be aware of the vendor lock-in problem, but I don't think it should be something that should cause you not to use no code for your solution. I think the cost savings and the speed savings are too great to not consider, no code versus a coded solution. Hope that's helpful, and good luck. If you have any additional questions, feel free to schedule a free consultation with me. And if you like our content, then subscribe to our channel and follow us. Thanks a lot.